when you reach a certain amount of books, there is going to be overlap in your stories. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I see it with other authors too, you know, authors that I love. In Save the Cat, I basically say there are 10 types of stories in the entire universe. You just have to keep refreshing those same stories. It's not even a matter of whether or not I'm going to write. It's just a matter of what's going to come out. Maybe it'll be bad, maybe it'll be good, but I never question it anymore. Every day was a struggle. It was like, I don't want to do it. Or I do want to do it. Or like, am I going to want to do it? Or I'm going to do other things first. I'll do it later. And it was just this constant battle with myself to do something that I supposedly love to do. And that made no sense to me. And so when I figured out, like, if I just sit down and do it first thing before anything else, it's so much easier. The struggle just leaves.
I love to hear other authors' stories. It is so inspiring and encouraging, especially when we hear their full story, not just the highlight reel. Because despite what it feels like sometimes, no one is an overnight success. So let's chat about different aspects of author life and dive behind the scenes of publishing.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this exciting chat with the amazing and talented author, Jessica Brody. I'm so excited you're here. Thank you for joining me.
I'm so excited to be here.
Yay! I have so many good questions for you. I think everybody's going to love this chat. But first, I thought I should introduce you just in case anybody has never met you before, although I have a feeling most people will recognize you. And then also introduce our topic, which is kind of all over the place, but I think it's going to be really fun. So in case you guys don't know, this is Jessica Brody. She's the author of, I put over 30 books, but Jessica, I tried to count on your website. I counted 34. Is that right? Or is that awful?
No, I've never counted them all. So,
really?
So I'm gonna trust that that's right. Yeah.
Yes. I was like shocked. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So I'm very excited to talk about that. But the book that a lot of you are going to recognize, because I've personally talked about it a lot on my channel, is Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And then now there's also the upcoming Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel, right? Which we're going to talk about.
That's right.
And then we've also worked together, I should say, on a self-publishing course, which I will link below if you guys are curious. It's on both Udemy and on Writing Mastery Academy, which, if you guys don't know, Writing Mastery Academy has many, many other helpful courses on writing and publishing. Do you know how many courses are on there? I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, wow. I think we're at 11 courses now.
Wow.
We just released a new course a couple months ago, and we're about to release another course in a few months. So I think we're about to, I think it's almost 12.
Holy cow. That's so exciting. And is it writing focused and publishing focused, or is there any other topics that I didn't think of?
So yeah, our course catalog covers like the whole process of writing a novel, from idea generation to fast drafting, to plotting, to character development, revising, and then all the way through to publishing, and then around you go again.
Yes, I love that. I love it. So I got to be a part of the self-publishing side, but I actually did watch your traditional publishing side out of curiosity. I was like, ooh, this is so good. So
complement each other pretty well, our two courses. I'm glad that we were able to get your course on there as well.
Me too.
Get, the other half of the market.
Yeah, that was really fun to do, and I'm very proud of it. So thank you for letting me do that with you. Today's topic is, like, I kind of thought, since you published so many books, that it would be really good to talk about kind of a long-term career in publishing and how to thrive and not burn out, and all those kind of elements that come into play when you keep doing something creative for a very long period of time. And so I have questions from Instagram, actually, on like deadlines and how to start and your outline process and all these good things. So we're going to start with a fun rapid fire Q&A, some quick questions to kick it off. All right. So what are your story planning / kind of outlining must-haves? Like, what do you do every time?
Oh, wow. I don't think there's anything I do every time. I feel like my process is always changing. I think, the one thing that kind of comes to mind is always the three questions, like, what does my character want? What do they need? And what's their big problem? Like, that's where I start everywhere. Every novel starts there.
I love that. That's amazing. I love that. So you always start with character?
I typically have an idea for a plot, and then before I get too deep into the plotting, I come back and I figure out, like, who's going to helm this ship, who's the who's the character
Love
that is
that.
going to go through this journey, or multiple characters in
Yeah.
that sense. And then I come back to those questions, which then will help me develop the plot around that character.
Ooh, I love that. I'm going to steal that. Because, yeah, sometimes I start with plot too, and I go a little too far. Starting with character makes so much sense. So if you could pick only one thing, and you couldn't do the other, would you prefer to read / write a series or standalones for the rest of your life?
Ooh. So it's like read and write the same, like both read and write.
Or you could do one for reading and one for writing. If you wanted to.
Okay. That's nice. It's nice of you to give me that. Sure. I think I would have to say a series for both, because you're always kind of having more to do. And as much as I love writing standalones as well, as you know, writing a series can just be so rewarding because you get to explore so much more of the world and the characters and the other characters that, you know, a lot of times you finish a standalone and you're like, but there's so much more I could do.
Yes.
And and you have to let it go.
So true. And this next question I put in here because I was like, this is so good, but every writer is completely different. So how much would you say you write each day / week, or at all? Do you write every day and week?
I'm a big fan of writing every day. And I used to kind of, that used to be my big piece of advice, was like, write every day so you don't get out of the habit of writing. Because I'm a big believer that writing, a disciplined writing routine is all about creating a habit. But that being said, I just recently started taking Sundays off as like a new experiment in just giving myself some time to rest. But you know what? I cheat a lot. Like if I'm really into a story or I'm just really loving the process, I will sneak in there on Sundays and
I love that. Let's just keep going. I love
cheat
that.
on myself. Yeah.
Well, right. It's not cheating if you're having fun, right? It's only like it gives you an out if you need it to not work Sundays.
That's right. Exactly. If I'm exhausted, I take it. Yeah.
That's perfect. So what for you would you say is like the most important element of good writing?
Oh,
it's a tough one. I know.
So I get to only pick one, right?
Yeah. You could cheat on this one too. That's fine.
I mean, I kind of sort of have to say plot just because I wrote a plotting book.
True.
If I
love
say
that.
like world or voice, I'd be like, don't buy my book, buy this other book about world.
Oh my gosh.
No, I mean, there's so many things that go into a good story, and you can't have just plot. You know, you can't have just character. You can't have just world. You can't have just voice. Otherwise, there's just, you need those other elements. So, but I do feel like when a good plot is missing, that is one of the things that readers will not forgive. True.
That is such a good point. I love that. And it is perfect because plot is literally key. Like you have such a good setup in Save the Cat. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I could talk about that for this whole video because it's so helpful. But you, speaking of, have so many exciting projects in the works right now, including the new Save the Cat. So what is a project you're especially excited about right now and or working on at this moment?
I'm actually working on a secret project that I've been talking about a little bit, not in any detail, just that it's a secret project. I worked on it for Nano this year, NaNoWriMo, and to the point where I think I've only told the premise to like 3 people in my whole circle.
Oh my gosh.
And that's a really big deal for me. I'm usually like shouting from the rooftops, like, this is what I'm working on. It's so much fun.
Really?
But I don't know, for some reason, this one, I'm just feeling like it's a little bit new in terms of the type of book it is. I'm just sort of keeping it a little close to the vest until I'm ready.
Exciting. I love that. I'm like so intrigued now.
See, this is my whole master plan. I'll get everyone intrigued, then I'll reveal it, and it'll be
Yes. Do you know, like, is it going to be like a year out, or like you're getting ready to talk about it, or somewhere in between? I'm curious.
Good question. It's one of the reasons that I'm having so much fun with it is it's actually my first book that I've written out of contract, and I can explain what that means in a second. But my first book that I've written out of contract in probably 10 years. So, I've been selling books to my publisher for the past 10, 15 years. So there's always I'm always writing the one that's already sold. So there's usually like a contracted book to come. And so when I finish a book, I typically have like, okay, I know exactly what I'm going to write next because it's the next contracted book for me to write. I already sold it.
That's a lot of pressure.
This is, it is. And that's why this has been so fun and so different because I turned in my last contracted book was Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel. I turned it in and then I just went, what do you want to do, Jessica? What do you want to write like next? And then the answer came to me and I was like, okay, let's do that.
Oh, that's so fun.
So I'm really haven't given myself any deadlines. I haven't given myself like, I mean, I have my, kind of daily schedule I try to keep to, but I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to work on this as I work on it and take the pressure off. And that's been really nice.
It becomes a passion project again versus kind of work, right? That's so cool.
And that's what I find myself cheating on. When I'm like sneaking in there to write when if it was contracted, I'd probably be like,
you'd be like, no,
I can't do this on a Sunday. Yeah.
I love that. That's so cool. And then, oh my gosh, that's just so fun because you're talking about like 10 or 15 years of being under contract. And I'm just like blown away. I've only been writing for 5 years. So that's like triple. And when I asked you if you're interested, oh my gosh. When I asked you if you're interested in recording, I was like, let's talk about your story, like the long term, because I'm so like fascinated by how you've been able to just still keep up the passion, still love what you're doing, but also very curious, like where you started and how you navigated that first book and any ups and downs and all this like cool backstory stuff. Because a lot of people, I don't know if you feel this way, but for me, it often looks like an author is an overnight success. Like you're just like, boom, and just came out of nowhere. But really, like we know when we're in it, it's never out of nowhere. It always is a journey, right? It's a process.
Exactly.
So So when did you feel like you, like when you started out writing, did you know at the time that you wanted to be a published author? And how did you first start out, I guess?
Well, okay. So I don't know how far you want to go back, but 7 years old, I was like convinced I wanted to be an author.
No way.
I was like, this is all I want to do. Yeah. But
That's
then
so cool.
then I grew up and I kind of got like in my head that being an author wasn't a real job.
People
like,
tell
that's
us
really
that.
fun. But it's not a real job. So I actually went to college and studied economics, and I got a job as a financial analyst, and I went down this whole kind of very corporate route. And I was writing on the side, and then I got laid off from my job, and I just thought, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I want to write. That's what I've always wanted to do. Yeah. So I put all of my effort and time and everything into trying to get my first novel sold. It took about 5 years from the time I really started trying to get published to the time that the book came out. So it's funny you said that because my joke was always my overnight success took 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, I sold my first book and to St. Martin's Press. And then I kind of got addicted. I was like, this is fun. Like I like writing books. I like making money writing books. This is great. So I basically just started a wheel of books being written. And as you know, like books, whether it's self-published or traditionally published, they take a long time to come out. And by the time you've finished writing one, there's still like so much time, particularly in traditional publishing. That was kind of the big shock when I first got published was how long it takes a book to come out. Like when they told me, I think I sold my book in, I sold my book in like 2006 and they said, okay, it's going to be out in 2008. And I was like, wait, what?
Wow.
And it was so shocking. And I was like, what am I going to do in all that time? And I was like, I guess I'll write another book. Yeah. And so
I love that.
I just sort of trained myself to let go of the project that I had finished and throw myself into a new one. And that pattern just led to this constantly moving wheel of a book is finished. It goes to the publisher. I start a new one. Then, the first one comes out, and it just kind of created this wheel that has lasted now for almost 2 decades.
Wow.
I just never stopped writing books.
I love that. I love that. And I didn't write this question down, but it makes me wonder if you feel this way. Sometimes for me, it's hard to go back when you're like working on a new project and it makes the old the previous ones feel like kind of old news almost. And it's
Yeah.
hard to want to like market them when you're like, but I'm writing this new book, or like your secret project you're working on now. I don't know if you feel that way
exactly.
at all.
No, I definitely do. And I actually have a book coming out very shortly on March 28th called Amelia Gray is Almost Okay. And it's a middle grade novel. And unfortunately, I don't have my author copies yet, so I can't hold it up. I wish I could.
It's such a cute cover.
I'm super
I just gotta...
Oh yeah, thank you. It was designed by Simone Blocker, who's so amazing. So I have this book coming out. I'm really excited about it. At the time I was writing it, I was, all in, totally into it. And now I'm like, but I just want to work on my other book. I don't want to market this one. But at the same time,
I can relate to that.
At the same time, I'm really hopeful that writers will enjoy reading it as much as I enjoyed writing it. It's just like this weird time travel gap because they're like experiencing something that you experienced 2 years ago. Literally. And then when they ask you questions and they're like getting into it and they're like, what were you thinking when you wrote this line? You're like, let me think.
So funny. I love that. Do you feel that way about like your very first book, or does that stick out to you? Do you remember what that very, very first book process was like and any big moments?
Gosh. It's so funny to me when people tell me they're reading my first book because honestly, I didn't even know it was still in print. Like it's so long ago.
Wow.
Sometimes I'm like, where did you find it?
I love that.
Yeah, and it's weird. I mean, my very first young adult novel was called The Karma Club, and I still get so many amazing letters from readers who are like reading it for the first time, and it's typically they're in middle school or they're in like younger high school age, and they're having all of these experiences reading it, like I'm relating to this and this, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool that I wrote something that long ago, and it's now impacting someone who is just that age. And it's also very surreal because I don't really remember the person who wrote that book. So
that's wild. I love that. And when you were publishing that, you said you actually knew you wanted to traditionally publish, right? Or did you pick that publishing path later on?
I did. Traditional self-publishing was not what it is today when I first started. Yeah. And we're talking 2000, what did I say? 2006 when I sold my novel. Wow. 2003 when I first started I guess it would have been 2001 when I really started like trying to write.
Got into it.
And so back then, self-publishing was like you would have to basically carry a bunch of inventory, like order like thousands of copies of your books, stack them up in your house, and then go to like festivals and try to sell them from a booth. That's what self-publishing was. And I remember, some people did do it, but I was like, that sounds like way too much. I'm not. No,
a lot of work, a lot of stress. Yeah.
It just wasn't as accessible as it is today. So I don't know what I would have done if I had kind of started now. But at the same time, I kind of, the lure of the like publisher and, the advance and the royalty checks, which of course are never quite as magnificent as the lure, promises them to be. Yes. But that lure was like very, very shiny for me.
I bet. And I love it too. And just like on the other side of it, the getting a agent and all the work that you have to put into that is honestly, in my opinion, just as much work. It's just a different type of work.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
Right. And I feel like when you said 5 years, I'm just like when you're past that initial breakthrough point, it just feels like you're always meant to be an author. Like I can't imagine you doing anything else because you're so good at it. But like, I bet in the moment or in those 5 years, I bet it was very hard to keep going. Like, I'm very curious what that process was like. Did you ever want to give up, or were you like, no, I know this is for me?
Yeah. And now I'm thinking the 5 years, I guess, would have been 2003 when I first started. And then the book came out in 2008. Yeah. That sounds more like it. Because I was like, I graduated in 2001. That's not right. Sorry, I'm trying to do math.
No, that's okay. I'm the same way.
I think everyone goes through that. Like, is particularly with traditional publishing because you are dealing with a lot of rejection. And it's sort of one of those, it's one of the definitely the cons, the pros and cons. It's definitely one of the cons of traditional publishing is you have to deal with people rejecting your work. And I know that you have to deal with that once you're self-published too, because you've got reviewers and all of that. But when this, agent who's supposedly like the professional gatekeeper of the publishing industry tells you like, this is not going to work, or I'm not going to be able to sell this, it's really heartbreaking. And
emotional.
I tried to treat it like a game. And that was the only way I could get through it, was like every no that I got, every rejection letter. I have over 100 rejection letters, by the way. Every rejection letter was like a one step closer to the yes. I just didn't know how many steps there were. So every time I would get a no, I'd be like, oh, well, that's one rejection checked off my list. I'm one step closer. You just didn't know how many steps that would be. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I love that, because it brings everything back to mindset, which is honestly what a lot of our questions are going to be about when we get to the like how to thrive long term. So that's incredible, because it kicked you off on the right foot and it started you off on the right mindset. Like from the very beginning. That's amazing. Yeah. I'm going to have to remember that. Do you feel like there's any like key element to your success that you're like, this really springboarded me forward in a way?
Yeah,
that's a tough question too.
It is, but honestly, I figured it out when I was pitching a book to my agent that I wanted to write and try to sell to a publisher. And my agent said, I remember this so clearly, he said, Jessica, I love how you can pitch your books in one sentence, because it makes it so much easier for me to pitch your books in one sentence to somebody else.
Interesting.
And that's when it kind of clicked to me that I was writing what I call high concept book ideas. And it actually, that concept of high concept turned into a writing course that is now in my Writing Mastery Academy. And it's called Develop Blockbuster Ideas That Sell. And it's all about how to create these ideas that are highly pitchable and highly sellable. Because the idea is that if you can pitch your book in a really succinct way and get someone interested, then you're going to have so much easier of a time selling it down the whole chain, no matter who's in that chain, whether it's an agent, a publisher, marketing people, blurbers, reviewers, or just directly to readers. If you can get a reader to understand what makes your book cool or hooky or whatever you want to call it really quickly, then you are just going to have an easier time. So I realized that I did that naturally. I came up with concepts that were very pitchable. And once my agent told me that, I then kind of tried to reverse engineer that, and I turned it into an online writing course. But I do feel like that was a huge part of why I was able to sell so many books, is that they were very pitchable concepts.
Oh, I love that. I feel like I could just take that one piece away today and learn so much from that and like apply it to everything going forward. That's genius. I love it. Oh my gosh. Now I'm like brainstorming and I got to stop myself and keep going. Was there anything that you feel like on the reverse side, like, cause that's the success side, but was there anything you feel like held you back and like maybe slowed you down?
Yeah, probably a lot. Well, at first it was definitely plot. Like I didn't know how to plot, and that's what brought me to the Save the Cat method. That, the original method was written by a screenwriter named Blake Snyder. He wrote the original book. And I found that book because I kept getting the same rejection, which was like, you don't know how to tell a story. So I had to teach myself how to tell a story, and that the Save the Cat method was a huge part of that. And then once I found that method and it made a lot of sense to me, then I really was able to like run with it. I was like, okay, I get this story thing. I can do this. And then, then every book is a new challenge. And that's what's really fun about it, is like every book challenges you as a writer. And I think one of the things that maybe has kept me passionate about it for this long is that with every book, I get to look forward to learning something. about myself, about storytelling, about characters. And every single book has a new problem to solve. And I love to solve problems. I'm like I love crossword puzzles.
So
I
cool.
love mysteries. Like I love to write, to like solve puzzles. So
Yes.
when I get into a book, I'm like, well, this is a new problem I've never had before. And it allows me to put on that really creative, like problem solving hat. And work through it. And I think that's one of the things that I just love about writing is there's always a new challenge to overcome.
I love that. This is, again, it's like the perfect job for you. Everything you say, it's like some people would hate that, but the fact that you love it just makes you perfectly, like it's a perfect fit. And so that makes total sense. Like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and it doesn't mean you have to, I just want to say, it doesn't mean you have to be like a natural problem solver to write a novel. But for me, I find that is the thing that draws me to the novel writing process.
I love that. And it's probably what has helped you like keep going through so many books too, is like, it doesn't burn you out. It almost fills you up instead. It's like the reverse, maybe. I don't know if you, I mean, we're going to talk about burnout in a second, so maybe I shouldn't jump the gun. Let me come back to my questions. Actually, you know what? I am going to jump around because why not? So we have a bunch of questions from Instagram, like I mentioned at the beginning. And so I was going to start with writing, but I think let's start with the burnout / kind of motivation, deadlines, pacing, just all the things that are kind of about the long-term side of publishing. And so I had multiple people asking me, they were like, how do you avoid / like combat burnout throughout this process, like the long term?
Oh, such a good question. Like I have good answers for short-term burnout. Long-term burnout feels like this whole other beast that I don't know if I'm well equipped to answer. But the thing for me, I love to pick new projects that don't feel like the previous project. And this, again, this is just me and everybody's different. And this might've been something that held me back to kind of answer your question before, is I never kind of went with a genre and just like put all my eggs in that basket. And I've seen other writers do that and they've really excelled. Like, they only write contemporary YA. And then they become this like name of contemporary YA. And that's great. But I've never really had the desire to keep writing in the same genre. So on the one hand, it probably helped me avoid burnout. Like I will jump around. Like I've written contemporary young adult. I've written young adult sci-fi. I've written young adult romance. I've written, then I go to middle grade comedy and then I go back to sci-fi. And now I'm writing my secret project. And and I wrote like some books for Disney Channel that were like based on somebody else's world. But just kind of, just like bouncing around just has kept my creative curiosity fresh, like refreshed at all times. But at the same time, who knows what if I could have become like something, much bigger in one of those spaces if I had just kind of like nose to the grindstone, pushed. So again, it's not really like a universal answer for everyone, but it's the way I think that I've avoided burnout was just to keep my creativity, creative curiosity alive by exploring different things.
I love that. And then you said you had short term as well, or was that kind of what you meant by short term? Because now I'm curious.
Short term burnout, I think, is more about the mindset in which you approach your project. It's very easy to get bogged down with your deadline, to put so much pressure on yourself to write a perfect first draft, which of course we both know doesn't exist. There's just I feel like there's so many unrealistic pressures that writers put on themselves, myself included, even after all these years, that we don't have to put on ourselves. And there comes a point where you have to kind of start to take inventory of what the triggers of stress and burnout are in your life. And then ask yourself, is that even necessary? Like, is that, can I push the book back to 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, whatever I need. Once I learned, with traditional publishing too, you kind of you have this contract and you've signed it and there's a deadline, like manuscript due. And you feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't turn the book in on this date, like the lawyers are going to knock on my door. They're going to ask for the money back. And there's all this pressure. And then you kind of go, you get like the nerve up, you email your editor and you're like, can I have a month? And she's like, yeah,
Please,
take a month.
yeah.
And you go, oh, well, that was easy. But we don't,
that.
we build it all up in our head. And then when we don't have to, it's not even a matter of whether or not I'm going to write. It's just a matter of what's going to come out. Maybe it'll be bad. Maybe it'll be good, but I never question it anymore. I feel like there used to be a point in my career where every day was a struggle. It was like, I don't want to do it. Or I do want to do it. Or like, am I going to want to do it? Or I'm going to do other things first. I'll do it later. And it was just this constant battle with myself to do something that I supposedly love to do. And that made no sense to me. And so when I figured out, like, if I just sit down and do it first thing before anything else, it's so much easier. The struggle just leaves. And now there's just no more struggle. It's just what I do. So I feel like everyone's kind of got a different thing that triggers their burnout. And I just would challenge everyone who is feeling burnout to try to pinpoint what that thing is, and then ask yourself, is it even necessary? Am I making this up in my head when it doesn't actually need to put this much pressure on me?
That is so smart. It's almost like you're reverse engineering it and figuring out, like, what are the consequences going to be if this doesn't happen, and just kind of accepting that. I feel like I've heard that somewhere, where you just accept the worst case scenario and then you feel better about it.
Yeah. Actually, it's like, I think it's like the Stoics were a big fan of like playing out stoicism. Like you play out your fear to its ultimate worst case scenario. And then suddenly you go, all right, actually, that's not that bad.
I love that. It's fine. That's hilarious. That is actually super helpful, because I bet burnout is something that just keeps like coming back. So having that like check-in period, do you feel like you check in frequently, like once a month, or just kind of whenever you're feeling that burnout kind of come?
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I implemented my Sunday day off was because I was starting to feel that burnout. And, when I tell people try to write every day, I always include the caveat, or at least consistently. So if you're going to write only 5 days a week, then try to write those same 5 days a week so that you create that routine and that habit. But it also always comes with the, footnote of like, but you have to take care of yourself too, because if you burn out, the writing's just going to be crap. So there's no point in pushing yourself to the max when it's good, the book's going to suffer as a result. So I think you just have to know, you have to know yourself, and you have to really kind of examine, what the process is doing to you, and then make adjustments. I think, I don't know if I have like a monthly check-in. I think it's more of just a feeling of like, this isn't fun right now. And there's a difference between the book isn't fun because it's hard. And there's between that and the book isn't fun because I am mentally and physically exhausted. And I feel like putting any more effort into this is just gonna, there's two differences, and you really do have to figure out the difference, because there is that really easy excuse to say, oh, this book is too hard, I'm just gonna not do it because I want to take care of myself. When really it might not be you that's the problem. It might be the book that just needs some extra TLC. So
I love that, where it's like, is it the book or is it me? Just kind of like separating the two, and instead of seeing them as one conglomerate or whatever. I love that. And then the second question about motivation is, honestly, I'm starting to see it as almost the positive side, because it's very similar to what we just talked about. But how do you stay motivated? Like kind of more the positive elements, I guess, when you feel like a project's taking forever, is how one person phrased it. Another person said, how do you stay motivated and get rid of the guilt that comes with not showing up? So like persevering and not feeling guilty
Well, I guess the guilt question is really interesting, because I would ask, what's the guilt about? Is it about how long it's taking? And then that goes back to that question of like, does that really matter? Or is that like an imaginary deadline you're putting on yourself? Things like that. But there is, guilt is real, and it definitely weighs you down, but there is like a kind of a point where you can start to look at the guilt and just question it and get curious about what it really is.
So good. Yes.
But motivation, yeah, I think for me, the key has always been in my writing routine. Like I stick to a very strict writing routine where I wake up every morning and I actually meditate first and I go for a quick walk. And the first thing I do, I don't look at phones, emails, anything else. I write. That's the first thing I do because I want my brain to be the absolute freshest that it is in the whole day. And that's when I find that is before I start distracting it with all these other things. Creating that routine, which I did, that routine started in 2016. I remember it was the first book I wrote with it was a book called The Chaos of Standing Still. And it was an experiment of like, what happens if I write before I check my phone? Just a question. What happens if I do that?
Yeah.
And it ended up being probably one of the most memorable creative experiences of my career. It just like things were just happening that had never happened before. I felt motivated more than not. And that's not true for every book, but it just set me up with like a realization of, wow, when I sit down to write with a clear head and not feeling like I'm being tugged in a million directions, I can actually get really good work done. And with that realization, I just clung to that routine. And I've been doing it ever since. So now 10, 11 years.
Wow. I love
math.
that.
Not terrible math. 6 years.
I didn't even check the math. I just was like, yes, I love that.
That sounds like a long time. 6 years. But now it's not even a matter of whether or not I'm going to write. It's just a matter of what's going to come out. Maybe it'll be bad. Maybe it'll be good. But I never question it anymore. I feel like there used to be a point in my career where every day was a struggle. It was like, I don't want to do it. Or I do want to do it. Or like, am I going to want to do it? Or I'm going to do other things first. I'll do it later. And it was just this constant battle with myself to do something that I supposedly love to do. And that made no sense to me. And so when I figured out, like, if I just sit down and do it first thing before anything else, it's so much easier. The struggle just leaves. And now there's just no more struggle. It's just what I do.
I love that. It kind of all boils down to almost mindset, like we've talked about in the past, where it's like you just expect it, and so your mindset accepts it, and it's no longer, like you said, a battle. I love that. So just sort of making it a habit almost. Is that, would you say it's like the habit part that motivates you, or?
I would say that once you create a habit, you take away that question of whether or not you're going to write. And I think that is often where the question stems from, of how do you stay motivated? It's actually like, how do I get out of this struggle of not wanting to write? But when there's no question of whether or not you're going to write, unless something, huge happens, unless something big happens that tears you away from your work and you can't work that day, which happens, there's just never a question. Now, that being said, there's not every moment I sit down and I'm like, yay, my book is working and this is amazing and I'm so inspired. That's not the case. But it's never a question of whether I'm actually going to work on it. It's just now a matter of, well, it may come out great today and it may not. Here's something I did. Actually, I just remembered this that is somewhat helpful. Well, was helpful for me.
Okay.
The thing about motivation, when the book is taking forever, like the question asked, when things feel really difficult, is to remember that the creative process is a process and it's not linear, and it's going to just be like this bouncing curve or whatever graph, whatever you want to call it,
all over the place.
And some days are going to feel great and some days are going to feel awful. And, one book, I got very curious about this process of like, every day it feels like I never know what to expect. So I actually started to graph my mood at the end of each writing session. So I would rate my mood. That. How do you feel about the book today on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being like, I'm a genius, and 1 being like, I should quit. And I graphed my mood over the course of an entire book. So it was like a 2 or 3 month process of the first draft. And then I looked at it and it was like, and it was so evident to me how this process is so up and down. And so what was really helpful about that is when I started the next book and I would feel really crummy, I'd be like, yep, look, remember when you felt crummy here and the next day it was amazing? And just that,
Oh my
that
gosh.
trust of knowing that those better days are coming is something that comes with time, but it's just a kind of having faith in the process.
That needs to be like a motivational poster. Like if I had like I would put that on my wall and keep it there forever. That's amazing. I love that. Oh my gosh. So when it comes to like deadlines, for example, I bet that comes into play a lot where it's helpful to remember, I've got this, I've done it before. But what do your deadlines typically look like, especially when you're on contract? Do they overlap, and does it get kind of crazy sometimes?
It has in the past, and I've tried, and that's sort of one of the things that contributed to burnout. I try to stagger the books in a way where I'm never drafting a book at the same time or two books at the same time. And preferably I'm not doing heavy revisions on a book while trying to draft another one, because I feel like both of those processes, the first draft and kind of the second and third drafts, are the ones that require the most brain capacity and require you to be in the story the most, right?
Yes.
Like where those are the drafts where you're not just working when you're working. You're like washing dishes and plotting.
Yes.
You're figuring out how this scene's going to work while you're, in the car. And when you are working on, I found myself, when I'm trying to do any of those processes at the same time, I feel like tugged around, like, which one do I problem solve during the day? So I try to stagger them where if I'm drafting a book, I can be like line editing or copy editing or reviewing copy edits or proofreading another book, because that doesn't require those bigger picture things.
So yeah, a different type of writing.
It doesn't always work out though.
That makes total sense. I love that. It's cool because it's like it takes almost a different part of the brain to do some of those that you were describing versus the coming up with worlds is so overwhelming that you need the full brain for that. Right. When you are kind of pacing yourself and like setting up these deadlines, or like how many books you want to write in a year, how do you figure out, I guess, a good pace, so to speak, for how many you could write / publish? Or maybe those are two separate things, writing versus publishing.
Yeah. And I think, again, we sort of come up to this traditional publishing versus self-publishing, where with traditional publishing, you do have some pushback where you can say like, look, I'm just not going to meet this deadline. And I've had plenty of books, the release date get changed. It's not the end of the world. I thought it was the end of the world at one point, but it turned out it was fine. The Save the Cat YA book, I think, has been pushed back like 4 times, but not all because of me. There was a lot of
I didn't know that.
There was a lot of pandemic related issues and things. Oh, yeah. So absolutely. But it happens. And at first, it feels like a giant catastrophe, and then you look at it and go, it's really not that big a deal.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
But with self-publishing, I feel like you have a lot of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like you have a lot of flexibility in that you can set those schedules and you can set those deadlines for yourself. And traditional publishing too, because you don't have to sell another book. That's true. If you sell a series, however, if you sell like 3 books in a series, then you might be on sort of kind of tighter deadlines. But I would just say play around with and figure out what works for you. Don't try to take on too much at once. If you're just starting out and you're seeing these other authors are putting out a book a month, don't try to emulate that right off the bat. Like figure out the schedule that's going to work for you and not cause you to lose your mind. And then if you're like, okay, I'm going to start with 1 every 6 months or 1 every year, and then you're finding like I'm twiddling my thumbs for a lot of this time, then okay, let's add another one into the mix and another until you get to the point where you feel like you are just working enough to keep yourself fulfilled without crossing the line of just feeling that burnout coming in.
I love that. And this makes me think of a question I didn't write down, but I sometimes push myself too far, and I personally do more than I should. I always like try to find the limit and then I go right up to it. So I'm trying to build in breaks. Do you build in breaks at all with your writing and publishing goals? Or do you feel like you found like the perfect sweet spot? like a balance, so to speak?
You're like preaching to the choir over here, because that is exactly what I do. I find the limit and then I bump right up to it. And a lot of times I overshoot. So I think like I could do this much and it's actually this much. And that has caused me that has kind of come back to bite me at times in my career, where I just feel like there's just too much going on. I guess I take short breaks in between books. Like I'm a big believer in giving the first draft space before you start revising it. So I will try to like build in at least a week or two or even a month between projects, or between, drafts of at least the first to the second draft, and maybe the second to the third even. But then I usually, like I said in the past, I'm sort of a new territory. I usually know exactly what to work on next because it's already contracted. And so I kind of just finish one, turn it in, jump into the next thing, maybe taking a few days off to like clean my house because it gets really messy in the throes of deadlines. Yes. Right.
There's only so much time. Yep.
But now I have this other thing. I started this Writing Mastery Academy in January of 2020. And it's this like great other project that I have that I can always go to, and I can always create another course. I can always, plan another webinar or do something in that space while I'm kind of letting other things percolate or rest. So that's been nice to have that maybe other thing in my life that's not books. That's not my own books.
Yeah, it's like a different type of creating, because you still sort of create a story, a sort of like you're taking the audience is not the right word, the student, I guess, through from start to finish. So that's like a story evolution, and they come out with an arc of having changed. So it's like you're still doing what you love, but it's different and maybe faster. I don't know. Maybe not. Courses take a while.
Depends on the course, but it's just it's rewarding in a totally different way. And so it's kind of nice to dip into that from time to time and keep things fresh.
Keep it interesting. I love that. Yeah. So that kind of answers I had a writing question of, do you work on, different projects at the same time? So it sounds like you kind of do from the sound of that. You kind of jump back and forth.
Yeah, I've sort of divided my day now into the morning is my writing time where I work on my own stories. And then in the afternoons, I work on stuff for the Writing Mastery Academy, whatever that might be for the day, whether it's building a new course or helping someone else build their course, like I did with you, or doing, marketing for the Academy, or doing a webinar or office hours or whatever it is. But I try to kind of divide my day that way.
I love that. You have so much going on. It's so much fun to because I relate to it too, where it's like, let's do all the things. It's fun to be multi-passionate. Yeah. But now I should come back to the writing, which was one person asked, how do you come up with so many book ideas? And I really liked how another person phrased it even more specifically, where they said, how do you find and keep story arcs and characters unique and fresh as you go through multiple books? Because that's been hard for me personally.
Yeah, it is challenging. When you reach a certain amount of books, there is going to be overlap in your stories. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I see it with other authors too, authors that I love, and I will see very familiar tropes or arcs or flaws or things in their stories. And honestly, it doesn't bother me too much as long as the story itself feels unique. But I think it's sort of the nature of the beast in that there, in Save the Cat, I basically say there are 10 types of stories in the entire universe. And you just have to keep refreshing those same stories. And I break down all these different books and say, here's where they all fit into these 10 things. So naturally, if you write more than 10 books, you automatically are going to write the same story over again. But as I show in the book, like The Grapes of Wrath and Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo are actually the same story type, but you would never think of those two books as being similar. So I think it's about taking sort of the elements of the story type you want to write and making sure that those elements always feel fresh. But at the heart of it, both The Grapes of Wrath and The Six of Crows are about a team of people who go on a journey and find some sort of truth about themselves and about the world. And, so we could say, oh, they're the exact same book. Well, not really.
Wow.
So I think there's always a way to reinvent an old story type. And it's something you kind of end up having to do when you write a bunch of books. So maybe just letting ourselves off the hook a little bit about being super original all the time.
I love that. Yeah. Cause oh my gosh, I had, I can't remember the titles for those 10 different types of stories, but I remember looking at it and being like, I'm telling the same one in book 2, the same like style or type of story, or I can't think of the term, but it was so funny. I'm like, well, let's try to make it different. Let's put a twist on it so it's not exactly the same. But like, I think that might be common too for like newer writers. I feel like I've started to branch out more and more, but I used to commonly tell a similar story. Do you feel like you are branching out more and more? Sorry.
I do. And no, it's fine. I do. And I think the secret story too is actually a genre I've never written in, but
I love that.
So that's been fun. But there are certain types of stories that are more popular in different genres. So like for instance, like young adult contemporary almost always falls into either the story type called the rites of passage, which is like coming of age, the buddy love, which is like a romance, and sometimes like sometimes a golden fleece, which is like a road trip story, which is also what the Grapes of Wrath and Six
really
of Crows
common.
Yeah, very common. And then like when you have sort of fantasy, there ends up being a lot of superhero stories, which are like chosen one stories. There's a lot of institutionalized stories, which is like bringing down some evil monarchy or evil empire or evil something institution.
Yes. So common.
So there tends to be like, they kind of have a lot of the genres will fit into certain places. But again, that doesn't mean that those books are the same. It just means that they're kind of using similar elements in their storytelling.
That's such a good point. I love that. It kind of gives people freedom, because I know newer writers tend to be like, I'm so scared I'm copying. But like you're saying, it's like you can put your own spin on it, and a lot of things have been done before, right? Pretty much everything.
Yeah, we can put our own copying.
Spin. Yes, literally.
We're all copying, and then we're just like trying to make it fresh. Exactly.
Yes, it's that weird balance. And so this is perfect because you brought up Save the Cat. And my next question was about, and I'll make sure to, by the way, link Save the Cat Writes a Novel below and Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel for everybody watching. But specifically, this question that they wrote was, do you have any tips on how to handle a character's arc through a series versus individual books? And I know you kind of touched on series in the first Save the Cat as well, right? I remember reading about that. It's been a few years now.
But apparently I didn't touch upon it enough, because a lot of people asked me this question. And, and so much so that I actually wrote an entire chapter into Save the Cat YA all about series.
Yay. Oh, I'm so excited.
So it goes way deep into plotting the events of a series, plotting the character arcs of a series, plotting what I call the world arc of a series, how the world changes across a series. So there is much more detail to come, but that's not very helpful for whoever just asked that. So I'll just say that the way I like to look at character arcs across the series is that each book is a smaller piece of a larger arc. So if you think of, I always just use Katniss Everdeen because she's so accessible. Everybody's read her. So the Hunger Games trilogy, you have a book about like sort of this girl who will do anything to survive, including, just lay low and feels like she has no control in this world or no power in this world. And then she goes all the way to being basically the face of a revolution. Now, she doesn't do that in one book. She does that in steps over the course of 3 books. And a lot of times she takes steps forward and a lot of times she takes steps back. And I think that's one of the things, the dynamic parts of plotting a series is there's a reason that book 2 or movie 2 of a trilogy is almost always the dark one. And that's because heroes will often backpedal against their arc. They will go to sort of a darker place because they're testing the limits of this arc that they're on, this journey of growth. And they will start to doubt themselves. They will start to retreat. They They will start to subvert things. So that's a lot of times why you'll see that kind of darker journey through book 2. And then kind of coming out into the light in book 3. So I would say, okay, there's an arc that goes across the whole book, and each book is a mini piece of it, but don't think of it as a line. Think of it as a kind of a moving,
I love that.
oscillating thing.
That's a really cool way to look at it. I was always struggling to find, like, kind of like you said, you need a visual for it as you're describing it. So for me, the visual is like a game on like I don't know, like I don't play games anymore, but like Nintendo kind of, where you level up to level 2, level 3, but it's the same, you're going the same direction, I guess. I don't know, but I like your way. Your way makes more sense.
Well, you could think of it. You could think of it as that game, like, to go really simple. You could think of it as Chutes and Ladders. Like when you hit when you hit a ladder, they make like, your character makes like great strides towards learning their whatever they need to learn, but they hit those chutes and then they go like back down, but never really to the very beginning, just a little bit of a setback. And then they go to another ladder and they go, but by the end they reach the end of the game.
They're like, yeah, they're going that direction. That's such a cool way to look at it. I like Chutes and Ladders. I'm going to remember that. That's genius.
A little simpler.
That's amazing. I love it. So, okay, this was such a good talk. I feel like I could go on and ask you so many more questions, but I will cut myself off there because we're already almost an hour in. And we have 2 fun outro questions that kind of just wrap it up, and they're kind of positive and fun. So the first one is, what is something on your author bucket list? And I bet you've accomplished a lot on your bucket list, by the way, at this point, but something could be out of your control or in your control, whatever you want.
My author bucket list.
It's a tough one, I know.
Yeah. Ooh, So well, none of my books have been movies or TV shows, which is, kind of a big bucket list item.
That'd be so fun.
But I mean, a lot of them have been optioned for TV or film, meaning like producers
so cool.
Like basically optioned the rights, but none have actually crossed that finish line. So that would be cool.
That's so cool.
And yeah. I have one. This is sort of like massive ego bucket list, but I've always wanted to see someone reading my book in a public place. I've never had that.
That'd be so cool.
That would be so cool. Like to see someone reading a book and then realize it's your book.
That'd be wild. I can't even imagine. Oh my gosh. You just catch me later on. I'll be reading your book. I'll send you a picture. I'm just kidding. Yes. No, but seriously, that'd be cool.
Pictures. And
yeah.
People post it on Instagram. They're like, I'm reading your book. And you're like, can I come see you do that?
Yeah. You're like, are you really?
Weird.
Wow. That's how I feel. I'm like, you're really reading it? That's so cool. When I see people read mine. Yes. Oh, I love the idea of, actually stumbling across somebody in public. I never would have thought of that. It's such a cool idea. So if you could give an aspiring author like one piece of advice, which again, another tough question, but what would you say if you could like boil it down to one thing?
I actually do have an answer for this.
Okay.
It's that you need to learn how to write badly before you can learn how to write well. And I think a lot of writers are so terrified of being bad. But if we just let ourselves be bad and we accept that being bad is part of the process, and I'm going to put bad in quotes because like bad is such a relative term.
No, but so true.
But if you let yourself write a really bad first draft, then you have a first draft and you can fix it. If you are too terrified to be bad, you will never finish that first draft. You will never have anything to fix. You will never have anything to publish or do with whatever you want with. So you have to allow yourself to be bad, to write terrible sentences and plot lines that don't connect and plot holes that you'll have to fill later and chapters that are just like, you feel like a first grader wrote them. Like all of those things are so normal and we all deal with it. And it's so important to remember that the books you see on your shelf were once really bad first drafts.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Everything that you're saying, I wish I could just like write it down, put it on the wall so I could see it and remember. because it's so much wisdom all in like 1 hour. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
You're so welcome. I hope it was helpful.
It was super
really
helpful.
Fun.
Yes. So before I forget though, I should say, where can we find you online? So I can put tons of links below for everybody to go find all your books and all the other good stuff.
Yes. Go to jessicabrody.com if you want to learn about my novels, more about the Save the Cat book. Go to writingmastery.com if you want to learn more about my online courses, including there is an official Save the Cat online course there, plus the other courses I mentioned, like the Blockbuster Ideas course, Bethany's self-publishing course, my traditional publishing course, and many, many more courses.
Love that. And by the way, this is something I forgot to say earlier, but you've got me so excited for Save the Cat Writes a Young Adult Novel now. I just got my anticipation just went boop up a level. Very excited. That comes out in June or July. I always mix those months up.
July, end of July.
Okay.
And keep your eyes peeled for a very massive pre-order offer that will be announced soon. And it will involve a lot of extra content that is not in the book. So.
Oh my gosh, I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. And also I should say congratulations on your upcoming release for the middle grade book as well. Is it Amelia Gray I don't want to butcher the title.
Is almost okay.
Yes. Okay. That's what I thought. I'm very excited for you. So I will link that below as well because it's very fun. And so thank you so much for being here. And you guys, thank you for watching. And we'll just comment below and thank Jessica in the comments because I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Talk to you again soon. Bye.
Bye.